So we are talking Red Sonja 2025, and I've got a fair bit to say about this movie, so let's get on with it. So this one is directed by MJ Bassett, who has also directed another Robert E. Howard movie in the form of Solomon Kane some time ago. I was a little bit confused, I have to be honest with you, when I was doing kind of some prep for this review, as MJ Bassett is now transgender, and I was a bit confused, like, well, who's directed this? I've kind of got a little bit mixed up, but yes, MJ Bassett, now a transgender director. And as far as Red Sonja goes, I was actually quite familiar with this character. I actually used to read the Red Sonja comics back when they were at Marvel Comics, along with kind of Conan. And yes, of course, everyone knows that there has been another Red Sonja movie, obviously back in the good old days with Brigitte Nielsen, but there was actually another live-action version as well. So this is actually the third live-action version. There was a Conan TV series of which Red Sonja appeared. So technically speaking, this is the third official live adaptation of Red Sonja. Now, what is the story? The story kind of is a cross between Gladiator, but more so, I would say, Spartacus, but in a kind of fantasy landscape. And they do refer to the Hyborian age, so it's a pretty kind of like high fantasy with monsters and things like this. But Sonja is a kind of a nomad living in the kind of the forest, and she is ultimately captured and sent into slavery, where she becomes a gladiator. But she defies the emperor, a la Gladiator, and leads an army of gladiators and slaves like Spartacus to rebel against this kind of empire and become the warrior she was meant to be. Now, what will happen in this movie, you'll have to watch it and find out. So, obviously, this Red Sonja kind of remake has been gestating for quite a long time. Of course, there was the version that was in sort of gestation for a while that was going to star Rose McGowan, directed by Robert Rodriguez, but of course that version never actually came to fruition. So, you know, let's talk about it. What do I think works in this movie's favour? I have to say, I am a big fantasy movie fan. I like sword and sorcery movies. If you are familiar with this channel, you've seen plenty of sword and sorcery movies that I've reviewed. And it's kind of a genre which is sort of less popular. You know, it's never as popular as sci-fi or kind of comic book movies, but they have their kind of, you know, they have their sort of moments. There are some elements of the production design that I did quite like, I have to say. Now, Red Sonja, we're going to talk about it again in the negatives, but she's been somewhat reimagined as a more modern version of this character. I have mixed feelings of it. Obviously, when Red Sonja was created, she was created for the male gaze. There's no getting around it, you know. And she was, of course, a sex symbol, and her whole thing was the she-devil with the sword was whoever could beat her in battle could effectively have her, if you get what I'm going. Now, they do kind of use that in this movie, but they actually use that with a guy. But we'll come on to that. But what did I like about it? So there are some aspects here that I kind of quite enjoyed. Now, they've kind of made Red Sonja a little bit like how, if you can imagine the Tomb Raider movies, where the Angelina Jolie one was more of the old classic Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, and then they did the Alicia Vikander one, which was more of the modern version. But here they've made kind of the Red Sonja character a lot more of like athletic, and it sort of makes sense, I have to say, you know, her being a kind of a warrior. As much as we all might like the classic kind of buxom sort of type that we would have expected from the comics, it makes more sense. It should be sort of more of an athletic sort of build. So I kind of get that, and I also kind of quite like the way that they've kind of given her this like picked look. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, it's like a historical sort of influence. Think Olga Korylenko from the Centurion movie. They've kind of given her that aesthetic, and I have to say I kind of quite liked it. They've also lent quite heavily into the kind of the fantasy elements here. We've kind of got like baboon people. We see various kind of like fantasy kind of creatures. There's like a giant sort of cyclops creature in this kind of arena fight and things like that. So it is definitely a kind of like a high fantasy world, and they're not kind of shying away from this. Even our kind of human antagonists, I kind of quite liked. The armor is medieval influenced, but it looks fantasy. It looks a little bit more, dare I say, sci-fi, and not particularly kind of, you know, historical to a degree, but still influenced by that. And I think it kind of gives it this definite kind of fantasy feel to it, where it's clearly influenced by medieval history, but it's that kind of fantasy element to it. I have to say I quite liked our bad guys to a degree. Our Emperor. Now, this movie loves an allegory and an analogy, and we'll come on to that again, but I kind of quite liked him. I thought he was quite charismatic, at least initially, for the first 2/3 of this movie. And he actually makes a fair point in the fact that he says knowledge is power. That's his whole thing. He's like an industrialist, and he wants to basically have this kind of world go on in an industrial revolution. And his thing is he wants to build machines. He has, you know, ideas for the future to kind of revolutionize this kind of like medieval style world, basically. And his whole thing is knowledge is the power. And to be honest with you, he is right in a large degree. Now, so I kind of quite liked the way that was depicted in some respects. It's clearly like an Elon Musk allegory here. Or that type of character, that type of, you know, billionaire sort of tech bro type. You know, if you like a metaphor or an allegory, you're going to love this movie because it's full of them. But there are other characters that I quite liked. There's this kind of big kind of like baboon henchman, I think played by Martyn Ford. They have this kind of like female henchwoman who's like an ex-gladiator, and she's kind of like haunted by these like voices in her head. And to me, I've got to say, I think she was the most interesting character, I have to say. So I kind of quite liked some of our bad guy characters, to be honest with you. I think our bad guy characters had the most interesting dynamic, I will say. Now, what about Red Sonja herself? I liked her look. I won't lie, I kind of liked her look. I also like the actress kind of like physical performance. I think she's kind of quite good at these kind of action sequences. She comes across quite well in these action sequences as a kind of like fierce warrior. And I think the actress gives it her all in those physical sequences, those action sequences, the screaming and the kind of like the shouting, that kind of fierceness that obviously the Red Sonja character is so famous for. And I think that does come across. And as I say, I kind of like the aesthetic to that as well. I do think some of the fight scenes are pretty good. Probably the standout for me was the second fight scene with this female sort of ex-gladiator that she kind of has. And there are some kind of fun sort of fight sequences that are achieved sort of, you know, on a practical basis. So I kind of quite liked some of the kind of the action sequences here. I thought they were relatively kind of well choreographed. And there are plenty of nods to kind of the sort of the world, this kind of Hyborian age. As I say, MJ Bassett has already been in this Robert E. Howard kind of world before. It is somewhat similar to the Jason Momoa Conan remake. So if you were a fan of that, and I know it has plenty of detractors, then I feel this may be a comparable movie. In actual fact, it was originally going to be a direct spin-off of that. But, well, when that movie bombed, they kind of scrapped that idea. So let's talk about what doesn't work. Okay, we've talked about allegories, analogies and metaphors, and boy, this movie is full of them. We've already talked about how this movie's bad guy is really kind of like a stand-in for a tech bro like Elon Musk, and it's pretty apparent. So if that's going to irritate you, I haven't even finished yet, because this is kind of a there is kind of messaging in this movie, quite a lot of it, about deforestation, about how the industrial complex is kind of like destroying indigenous cultures, and how it's affecting the natural world. Red Sonja herself is an eco-warrior. She is an eco-warrior in this movie. And, you know, she loves the animals and everything like that. I can't help but feel a Beastmaster reboot might have been a better option if you wanted to go into the eco-warrior kind of aesthetic. We see like a kind of a fantasy version of a rhino where the horn's been taken off and things like that. So she's kind of quite changed, and there's a lot of kind of, as I say, very sort of obvious kind of allegories and things like that for real world events. So if you don't like messaging in your movies, I feel that this may be a little bit more for some. It might actually appeal to some, but it's worth pointing out that Red Sonja was never really a kind of a message character. You know, and let's talk about the original Red Sonja and the decision to kind of make her into this kind of more modern version of it. Let's be honest with you, had they made the Red Sonja of, you know, of old, it wouldn't have done well, because it would have got absolutely caned by progressive audiences. But, you know, they've made this version instead, which I feel is in many ways a departure from the original. So this is a character where I feel you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I, you know, personally would have preferred to see the kind of the more classic version, and then just lean into that, the kind of the kind of the sexual kind of nature of the character and that allure, you know, and that sort of you know, old-fashioned kind of fantasy aesthetic, which I know won't go for some. I also wish that they would have led into the violence and the gore a little bit more, because this is a movie which is violent, but it never really kind of leans into like a hard R rating. And I thought, you know, that might have been the way to go with this movie. I honestly don't think it would have been successful anyway. I just don't think this character could be translated into a legitimately commercial prospect, because I feel whatever you do with this character, it's not going to please everyone. And they've decided to go in a sort of, as they say, a very modern depiction of this character, which I feel, you know, might not please purists of this character, or the sort of the critical drinker crowd and things like this. But I also think if they had gone in the kind of the style of the Marvel comics, or the kind of the earlier stuff, that would not go down with other people. So this is a character which is only ever going to be a niche character, to be honest with you. Now, I've mentioned I quite like some aspects of the actress that kind of plays Red Sonja, but I do not think she is particularly charismatic. I liked her in some of her physical action sequences. I think her look, I think I can get on board with, to be honest with you, even though it isn't that sort of buxom sort of version that we've seen in the comics. I still liked it, but I just didn't think she had a particularly interesting screen presence. I think the villains were more interesting. I think she was good in the action sequences, but really didn't have much charisma. And she was actually quite wooden. I don't think her acting was bad, I will say that, but I just think she lacked charisma to be this kind of leading sort of good guy, our protagonist. She was not as interesting as our villains. And also the supporting cast of heroic characters also are actually cringe-worthy. Now, I've mentioned that whole thing where, you know, in the comics and stuff, Red Sonja's thing was like, she wouldn't sleep with a guy unless they beat her in combat, which of course they never really did. Only Conan really was the sort of one, and Wolverine in one What If comic. But anyway, here there's a guy that does that, and it's like, oh man, you've made that thing. You've obviously wanted to include it, but you didn't want to have that sort of for a female character. So you've made it for this guy who sort of says that, which makes him feel like a massive simp, I have to say. And then that whole chain bikini thing, yes, it's in the movie, but it's kind of played for laughs. Like, well, what protection is this going to give me? None, but the crowd want to see it. So it's almost kind of like, it has these references that are in the classic kind of material, but it almost sort of deconstructs it and kind of, you know, somewhat takes the piss, I have to say, which again I can see totally annoying some purists and stuff like that. So, you know, let's be honest with you, that might be a problem for some there. I think, you know, it's ironic to a degree where this movie's main character is an eco-warrior, and this movie is very much trying to have this positive message about the natural world and how this kind of industrial complex is bulldozing the kind of indigenous people and the natural world. But it has this real artificial look. Think Xena and stuff like that. It really feels like a lot of this is filmed on green screen or in a studio. And we're meant to believe that this is, you know, she's the kind of the protector of this kind of natural world and all this. But it has this kind of like artificial look where some of the kind of obviously the backgrounds are clearly like, you know, projections or kind of added in green screen, and some scenes are clearly on a studio and stuff like that. So I mean, I think it feels a little hypocritical. I'd even go so far as to say, when we're kind of talking about this natural world thing, and then it feels so fake when we're in this air quote natural world. I guess it would have been more expensive and out the budget to kind of film on location and kind of like the natural environment and build sets and stuff outside. But you know, that's how it comes across, I've got to say. Some of the acting here is a little hokey, I will say. Some of our supporting characters, yeah, they're kind of, their line delivery is a little, well, it's very modern. Let me just put it like that. It has a very modern feel to it in some aspects. And again, I can kind of compare it to the likes of kind of Xena. So, you know, again, if you're a fan of Xena and stuff like that, then you know, it may well appeal to you, I suppose. And it has this kind of very cheesy, be everything you can be style kind of like platitudes in it. I'm thinking, oh man, this is like really cheesy at times. Some of the kind of like the stuff that it's kind of saying, it's like, oh god, it's quite cringe, I have to say. And this has this bloody annoying horse. And a little side note here, this is Deus Ex Machina horse that magically appears and saves the day multiple times. It's like, bloody hell. Yeah, so, you know, it's a kind of, I kind of liked it on some base level, you know. It's a fun, throwaway adventure movie. I quite like some of the action sequences, I quite like some of the production design. I found our bad guys to be interesting until they kind of like, I think, tried to kind of give them a little bit more humanity in the third act, which I didn't think really helped, to be honest, but I liked them in the first two acts. There's some interesting stuff going on, but I think this movie was a little bit kind of like always going to be a difficult sell, regardless of whatever decision they took with it, to be honest with you. They went this way, and again, I can honestly see it being somewhat maligned because of it. I don't think it's a terrible movie. I think it's somewhat watchable, but it's kind of like not going to be for everyone. And some of the issues that I have with it make it pretty much an average kind of like somewhat sort of serviceable but throwaway fantasy movie. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? Please do let me know your thoughts, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.